the stars are falling, beckoning to a new world. I can feel the ceiling falling, pushing mortals past the fall. I can feel my soul igniting, burning toward a path unknown. And I would sacrifice Terra just to see you home again. The million of stars and the moon call my name, to seek for a place for the truth to be tamed. Your lasting warm touch gives me hope through the night. The soul starts igniting from the bare crystal light. I will not let you go. I will let this world unfold. That's a promise I made for me, until this path is paved for thee. This day goes on eternally, but I will never forget thee. I know you walk, will never leave, and I will pave this path for me.
Atreus placed his hand over his bruised torso, gathering the iron taste in his mouth and spitting crimson out to the side. He tried to catch his breath, but there was no time for further respite. His opponent was coming, and the young man had calculated everything perfectly in his head. The hulking brute Atreus was facing had a 3-string signature combo, a combo that Atreus finally had a plan to counter. First, a horizontal swing from the man's 7-foot-long spear. The attack covered a large area, and it did not help that the opponent had finite control of the weapon. Atreus stepped into the strike, hinging at the waist and ducking the attack with lackluster but effective spacing. Second, his opponent flourished his weapon behind his back and spun around, using the momentum for a distancing horizontal slash. Atreus had trouble with the second attack before, as one could tell from the gashes and blood staining his clothes. The speed, the added jump, and again, that range made it extremely difficult to avoid. So instead, Atreus decided to try his odds at parrying the blow, which after several failed attempts prior, finally succeeded. Atreus' sore arm deflected the heavy blow and slipped into the man's guard. His opponent rooted himself and swung his spear vertically to catch a rushing Atreus as the last part of his combo. Atreus felt himself falling into his usual dilemma, being that his body sometimes struggled to catch up with his mind. He watched almost in slow motion as the swing approached him, threatening to cleave him in two. The adrenaline pushed his doubts out of his mind, and the intelligent design of his counter vocalized as a heroically intellectual. Atreus' reflexes took over, pushing past the fatigue as the young warrior lightly spun to his left and dodged the attack. The hairs on his arms raised in excitement. He could almost feel the electricity dancing in the air. He inhaled the energized atmosphere, filling his lungs with a triumphant exhilaration as he stepped into the exposed man's side and slashed his shamshir with all his might.
Slow.
Atreus could feel a hand slam into his wrist, catching his strike.
What?
His momentum stopped, as did the charge in the air. He looked onto his opponent's eyes based with ivory and accented with bold hues akin to the radiant lights of the setting soul. Atreus, still fueled with adrenaline, reflexively struck the man's exposed abdomen.
Yeah!
Sweat beaded down his forehead as he realized the strike was still akin to hitting a mountain with a tree branch. The strike, which should have elicited the opponent's gasping for air, was only given a grunt in face of mild annoyance.
Really?
Well, shit.
Atreus felt a size 20 boot slam into his chest and was sent tumbling across the grassy plain. He finally ended up on his back, breathing heavily before his focus fell to the clear sky above. The beautiful crescendo of purple, gold, and blue lights chased after the setting soul.
All right, I get it. The great Balor Einar will never lose his touch.
Atreus closed his eyes for a moment, finally catching the fleeting sparrow that was his breathing with one deep breath that he held in. The cool breeze from the mountain plains did what it could to revitalize his overly fatigued body. He finally released the breath slowly and opened his eyes. Balor standing over him, giving an all too familiar smile, before extending his hand.
Son, you've grown strong. No need to always be so tough on yourself. I don't think you've ever landed so many hits on me in one sparring session.
Oh yeah? Won't be too long until I finally beat you then, right?
Not a chance on Terra.
Atreus smiled at the thought, taking his father's large hand to be lifted up off the ground as if he was still but a boy. Balor towered over Atreus at a staggering height of 6'7". Atreus merely standing at a 5'10" despite being the son of the hulking man. Balor's skin was a dark base of molasses, with pristine white teeth overtaking the glow of his ivory eyes. The man's salt and pepper hair was pulled back into a ponytail of braids and locks adorned with gold jewelry. His bearded face held wrinkles as old as the soul itself, and crinkles just as bright and jubilant. He wore a gray cloak, which covered his leather tunic riddled with straps and mystery pockets. His gloved hands adjusted themselves on his spear, which he named Brachus. The blade was placed into the ground at his side, and he leaned on it and gave Atreus an all too familiar smirk. Atreus simply rolled his eyes as he dusted the dirt off his clothes a bit, before turning over and taking the view in once again. They had been camping in the plains for a while now, and the rolling expanse of what would normally be green pastures at the foot of beautiful mountains was suppressed by the last of the winter snow covering the ground in patches. The yellowed grass peeked its way out of the thin layer of snow and slush and made Atreus smile. After all, it was the cradle of his favorite season, where new life teemed and the air was free with joy. Atreus' vision was obscured for a few moments, as the light of the soul shone through the monumental clouds in the sky. He raised a hand at first to block it, but then smiled, and let his skin bathe in the day's final rays of light. Atreus stayed still for a few moments in silence before he heard his father's hoarse voice cut through. Atreus turned around to see his dad sitting on the ground, catching his breath.
Hey, probably about time we moved camps. I think the map says that Dallas is close to here. We could skirt along the edge, maybe find some forest to stay in instead of these open plains. Spring rain is gonna start soon.
Well, maybe some more shelter would do me some good. These old bones are bound to start aching when the rain comes.
I mean, for 70-year-old bones, you're still kicking my ass.
Naturally.
Atreus nodded and smiled. His gaze softened, and he reached down with two hands to help the gigant bat to his feet, and they went off to pack their campgrounds.
So, you want to head around Dallas, eh? You wouldn't by chance be plotting on getting us to go into town now, would you?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's been months since we went into any town to stock up on supplies. Besides, there's nothing out here. We've camped in better places, Dad. Come on. Would you toss me the straps?
Yeah. Here, catch. Well, it's quiet, and you have to admit sometimes simple and empty can be good for the mind, yeah? Unlike a bustling town full of nosy people.
I mean, sure, but I can only spend the night talking to you about your aching joints for so long.
Atreus gave a fake laugh to mask his animosity toward the subject. However, a clueless, jubilant Balor continued, egging on his son's growing frustrations. Balor walked over with the last of the pack, placing it on top of the others and smiling toward Atreus, who was focused on the straps.
Oh yeah! And what riveting conversation would sate your appetite? Or, better yet, where would you have us stay for the next week?
A home. Our home.
There was silence. The air was pulled taut at the comment. Atreus stared into those burning golden eyes of the retired Exorcist, one of many warriors renowned and feared across Terra. Wherever an Exorcist went, death seemed to follow their eyes, and any who saw them would promptly ask, or tell them, to leave. Balor's eyes seemed to throw those memories back into Atreus' face. It wasn't his fault in the end, it was the fear of those eyes. The eyes of a monster that are said to beget monsters. And in the end, who in their right mind would live down the street from a monster? Atreus shook his head before he continued strapping down the equipment.
Hey, Atreus.
The soul is gonna set soon. I don't want to know what might happen with your aching bones stiffening up while driving through these plains past your bedtime, old man. Let's get going, all right?
Balor stopped, Atreus trying to lighten the mood with his joke, but for a moment, he could see a sad look in the crinkles of his father's eyes. But the older man shook it off, simply giving a smile and nodding. Atreus knew that asking to enter a town was a touchy subject between the two. However, sometimes he just couldn't help it. The two of them had been nomads for as long as he could remember. Only a few faint memories of his childhood were in an actual home. He often fantasized of living amongst people without the stigma of his association to someone viewed as dangerous. Atreus leaned against the bike for a moment, rummaging through his pack before procuring the only keepsake he had of any home ideal. It was a weathered photo of himself, Balor, and his late mother, Galeana, a much shorter woman, with hair braided, a blinding white smile, and ivory eyes, just like his father's. Then there was Atreus, with pools of melted brown sugar for eyes. Atreus broke free of the sentiment as Balor turned to start his bike. He placed the photo back in his bag and took a step back for the man to begin. The engine roared to life and started making a high-pitched ringing sound.
Is she supposed to be making that noise?
Well, looks like old Shayla's gonna need some maintenance.
Well, Dallas is the nearest town.
Atreus felt a silent relief wash over him and a smile crept on his face. Bike maintenance meant that they would have to venture forth into one of the larger towns to assure they had a good mechanic to work on the high-tech Exorcist bike.
Hey, it'll be fine. We'll go in late and leave early. No one's gonna bother with us.
Balor reached into his pack and retrieved a pair of almost blackout-tinted shades. His eyes were successfully obscured. The man looked to Atreus, giving a sarcastic smile. Atreus hopped on the back of the bike and Balor chastised.
Where's your helmet?
When am I gonna get a pair of shades?
When you buy them.
Fair enough. All right, come on, old man. Let's go make them.
The duo rode into the city as the soul had finally set over the horizon. The streetlights were lit, and the sound of indistinct laughter and conversation carried along the paved sidewalks. It was still busy, the weekend likely beckoning forth the nightlife as people lined up outside of buildings playing music and danced down the clean brick-laid streets. Dallas was paved in a scheme of beige as the main color, with dark wooden accents and various sprightly pastels splashed about. The housing was very close together, buildings and residential townhomes layered in with one another. Many of the balconies and buildings themselves were adorned with growing greenery. Vines and flowers laced themselves on the weathered surfaces and danced along intricately, showing off that their history of growth was likely just as long as the history of those residing within. The city was fairly large, divided by north and south ends of the town. Black metal street signs provided direction. The south was abundant in public life and shops, while the north end was mostly residential. Eventually, Balor pulled over to the side of the road somewhere in the southern part of town and parked his vehicle, leaving the engine running. Atreus dismounted and looked around before noticing the garage they were parked the building down from. He looked over to Balor, who still had his shades on, and sighed.
Dad, you can take your glasses off, you know? Only douches wear soul glasses at night. Besides, it's too dark for anyone to notice your eyes, unless they're staring.
I think the people of Dallas will forgive my douchey behavior for one night. Can you go find the mechanic now, smartass?
Atreus walked over to the shop. The door was closed, but the lights were still on in the lobby.
Greasy Graysons. Nice.
Atreus tried the glass door and stepped into the shop with the wind chime. It smelled just like any mechanic shop would smell. The wonderful aromas of oil, lubricant, and other mystery flavors fighting against a tree-shaped car air freshener hanging above the frame into the garage. He noticed a woman's voice.
So, what's your point? I ordered that shit months ago.
Atreus took the liberty of entering the garage. It had a blue truck as well as a few parts laying all around, but was otherwise empty and well kept. He rounded the corner of the room before seeing a woman sitting at a computer, still on the phone.
Listen, I don't have time for this. Get me my shipment or I'm going to call corporate.
Excuse me? Sorry, the door was open, but no one was in the lobby.
The woman gasped
Light
and stood quickly before her amber-colored eyes relaxed and replied.
Light of Animos, you scared me. Sorry, I'm running the shop solo this weekend. Can I help you?
Yeah. My dad and I have this bike that's been making a weird noise, and we're bringing her in for fuel maintenance.
The woman raised an eyebrow and approached Atreus. She had on a black leather jacket that matched her boots. Underneath was a green sleeveless crop top that showed off her pale and rosy skin. She also wore ripped blue jeans that reached down as a full pant leg on one side and were folded over as shorts on the other. Her hair was like fire, vibrant and crimson with a black headband holding it neat. The woman was shorter than Atreus and smelled like flowers. On her face were two black beauty marks that sat uncannily even on either cheek.
Fuel maintenance. You mean like you need your fuel filter replaced or something?
Atreus looked around the shop and leaned in, lowering his voice.
More like... Do you happen to know anything about Exorcist vehicles?
The woman gave him a confused look. Before her eyes widened and she sprinted past Atreus. He felt his heart drop as he ran after her.
Ah, shit.
When Atreus stepped out of the shop to see where the woman went, she was already standing in front of the bike, talking excitedly to a stoic Balor. The man nodded to her, and she enthusiastically began examining the bike. Atreus walked over and Balor looked to him, Atreus motioning to his own eyes, and Balor simply shrugging.
Doesn't seem like she cares, luckily. But don't you think you could have been a bit more smoother with the delivery? Exorcist bike.
Atreus shrugged.
A Severance GX 700 series. That's what you needed maintenance on? What's a bike like this doing all the way out here in Dallas?
Atreus looked to Balor, who nodded.
Just sightseeing. Camping a bit here and there.
You guys don't have better things to do? I heard over the phone that people have been talking about monsters popping around. Is that why the other exorcist came by the town asking questions the other day?
Another exorcist?
Atreus looked to Balor again, who stiffened at the comment. Atreus never met another exorcist or had even seen one now that he thought of it. But the way Balor tensed up made him uncomfortable.
I wasn't aware another exorcist had been assigned to the area. Miss,
Sonia. It doesn't matter anyways. There's a bunch of rich folks that live up by the mountains, and we all know that the rich would never shack up near a place that could be potentially attacked by...
So what did you say the problem with the bike was, Miss Sonia?
The woman paused before replying, her mind barely missing a beat.
Looks like you guys need some air filter changes along with a resonator change. You're in luck though, I can get it all done here. It'll only take a few hours, but it might be a bit expensive.
That's fine, miss. When do you think you'll be done?
Well, you guys can come back and pick her up in the morning and pay as well.
Atreus smiled, and the woman went over to stand next to the two.
Actually, we can just pick it up tonight.
That sounds perfect! We'll see you in the morning then. What time does your shop open?
Atreus elbowed the man in the gut before speaking over him.
Just come in around 9. I'll be here.
Atreus nodded, the woman extending out a soft hand that he grasped to shake. She gave a wink to Atreus, and it made his stomach flutter a bit. She also put her dainty hand in Balor's massive fist to shake. Atreus spoke once more.
Hey, Sonia, do you maybe have any recommendations on where we could grab some dinner? I was craving pasta.
Oh, there's this nice place a few blocks down. Make a right at the water fountain and a left on the next road, and it'll be on the left side of the main city street. It's called Ivory's. It has pasta as well as other foods based on this cuisine of this city called Strata.
Atreus muttered the directions back to himself before he replied to the woman.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Sonia turned and looked up to the towering Balor. His expression hardened, as if he was expecting the worst. She took a few moments before she spoke.
By the way, I love your locks. And your braids are so nice as well. Who did them for you?
Atreus breathed a silent sigh of relief before Balor laughed.
Thank you, young lady. I braided these myself, and my locks were done by my wife years ago.
Well, maybe you could show me how you braid your hair before you two leave tomorrow.
She turned to Atreus again, looking him up and down before giving a quick sigh and smiling.
You two have a good night now.
She walked away, and Atreus began moving in the direction of the restaurant.
Atreus!
Atreus turned around and noticed the look on his father's face. His eyebrows raised twice in quick succession.
Shut up. I'm starving. Come on.
Balor began to follow behind him before he turned, remaining still. He sniffed the air, and Atreus questioned.
What's up?
Balor paused for a few moments, scanning the town, before he finally replied.
Something smells off.
Atreus looked on, but could notice nothing out of the ordinary, before Balor finally replied.
It's probably nothing. Come on, let's go eat. I don't want to be out on the street if we can avoid it.
Atreus grinned at his father, stepping up close.
Race you there?
Balor paused a moment, before grinning and shoving Atreus back, running ahead of him down the street.
I'm gonna trip your lanky ass.
He started jogging down the street after the man, taking a look at the pale purple light of the Luna, beginning to peek her rays over the horizon.
Ivory, Exorcist.
Atreus and Balor sat outside of Evelier's. Their plates were licked clean and their bellies were stuffed. Balor was enjoying a frothy beverage, a look of content on his blushed face. His shades had made a reappearance, though none of the other patrons seemed to really care. The area was still relatively busy, with people enjoying late-night strolls to and from the main streets of downtown. Though Atreus inferred that the dimly illuminated street gave Balor enough anonymity to feel comfortable. Atreus felt a yawn creeping in, clenching his jaw in an attempt to stifle it as he looked onto his father.
Tired already? City life has made you soft, son.
Balor smirked behind his mug, the amber ale tumbling down his throat at a rate both impressive and disturbing.
Me? Soft? You seem to be enjoying yourself plenty.
Balor grunted in response, placing the empty mug onto the table. Atreus reached over to the menu beside him and glanced across the options again. Their waitress approached, beginning to clear the table. The blonde woman spoke in a lively tone.
How was everything, boys?
Everything tasted wonderful, Gracie. Thank you.
Of course! Are we thinking about dessert? Another drink?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, young lady. I know your sweet tooth is calling, though. So go ahead. Order that pie.
Atreus smiled.
I'll take the full berry pie, please. And another drink for Gramps over here.
Coming right up, sir!
The woman regarded the two before leaving with the dishes. Atreus looked around at the town again. The people, the laughter, the families. Everything about the place screamed peace at the young man. A peace that he longed for.
You ever wonder what it'd be like to live in a place like this?
A house in the city, just you and I,
Atreus turned and saw Balor with a smile on his face. He could be an old, muddy rock stuck in his old ways sometimes, but Atreus understood in the end that what they were doing was for the best. so that they could live in their own sort of peace. Still, he could not help but wonder why people who could laugh with Balor like their waitress, compliment his hair like Sonya, and take his every gentle deed for face value, like everyone they had met. Why would those same people treat him completely differently if they saw his eyes?
Or maybe we could live amongst those rich folk that Sonya was talking about.
With my money?
What, you don't have enough?
I have quite enough, I'm sure. But how are you going to afford it, young man?
How much could it be anyway? Name a price.
25,000 verse.
Fuck off.
A month.
I mean, if I got some money working in the city, that would work, right? And we could go hunting like we always do in the forest next to the city. I mean, we'd still be able to travel all we wanted and...
Atreus.
No, hear me out! It could work if we were still secluded enough. You wouldn't have to worry about people, and I could take care of the bills or whatever by coming to town to work with your bike and...
Son,
Come on, Dad, please. We could have such a better life.
what we have isn't enough.
Atreus deflated. He looked away from Balor in shame, unable to see the look of sadness that had spread across his father's face.
It isn't that, Dad.
I don't blame you, son. Truly.
The two sat in uncomfortable silence. It was not the first time they had this conversation, and it would probably not be the last. This fact did not make the situation any more bearable in the moment. Balor leaned in close, removing his glasses and taking a look into his son's eyes.
Atreus, I've told you this before, but I'll say it again. I can never live in a place like this.
Atreus leaned in to respond, but was faced with a massive hand lifted to his face.
You, on the other hand, have no such restriction.
Atreus leaned back in confusion.
What do you mean?
You could live in a place like this, son. Get a job, meet new friends, live your life. You're your own man now, and if you feel that you have to spread your wings,
Come on.
Balor placed a hand on Atreus' arm.
then I would be happier for you than you can imagine.
Atreus looked into the eyes of Balor and saw no malice, or even sadness. He saw only that familiar sincerity. It was true. There was not any real reason as to why Atreus had to live with his father in the way that they did, nearly cut off from all civilization. Yet, every time the thought came to mind, he could not bring himself to leave his father, who had cared for him alone his entire life. He could not abandon him like that. He would not.
Dad,
A scream rang down the street, the shrill tone bouncing off of the walls of the surrounding buildings, giving it a ghostly quality. Balor immediately stood and scanned the area, reaching for his weapon concealed beneath his clothing. Atreus remained seated, unsure of himself.
What?
Quiet.
Another scream followed by clumps of people running down the street toward the restaurant. Some of them were suffering from bleeding wounds that seeped into their clothes and stained the pavement. Atreus felt blood rush into his ears, his heart quickened as the adrenaline coursed through his veins. A heavy hand gripped his shirt and yanked him out of his seat.
We need to leave, now!
Balor sprinted down the street with a speed that would put athletes a fraction of his age to shame, dragging Atreus by the shirt and unsheathing his spear as they moved toward the mechanics. Townsfolk were panicking all around them, shops closing metal shutters and families slamming doors. Those unlucky enough to be caught without shelter pounded uselessly against barred entrances.
Hey! Hold on a second. What is it?
Bloodless. I knew I smelled something. Just had no idea my senses were so dull.
As they rounded the corner, they were met by a fleeing local who smacked hard against Balor, causing the stranger to fall to the ground. Balor reached down and hauled the man to his feet.
The Bloodless, where are they coming from?
Man simply whimpered and pointed further down the street, where another man and woman were running toward them from the corner. A figure of seething muscle leapt from the shadows and tore into the couple. The woman being ripped near in two as the creature swiped at her midsection. The man attempted to flee but was slammed into the pavement with a sickening crunch, the bones on his face cracking from the force. The creature secured its grip on the man before opening its jaws and drooling a dark, slimy substance onto him. It caused black tendrils to spread across his body and make him writhe in pain. The man contorted in agony, looking up toward Atreus and reaching out a hand. The grim spectacle turned Atreus' stomach, the reality of what he was seeing causing the synapses in his brain to rapid fire. Yet without thinking, Atreus took a step forward and moved to help, reaching for the sword strapped to his back before feeling the immeasurable strength of Balor yank him backward.
Get off me! We can help!
Atreus looked to the man on the ground and saw a flicker of light shine from the alleyway. The smell of ember filled the air. A second later, both the creature and the man were engulfed in a fire so potent, Atreus could feel his eyebrows singe as their bodies were incinerated in mere seconds.
Shit.
Balor pulled Atreus along and the pair ran as fast as they could away from the flames that were spreading across the city, engulfing anything unfortunate enough to be in the vicinity as they rounded the last corner of the streets. Atreus looked back. Through the crescendo of yellow, orange, and red heat, he thought, for a moment, he could see a silhouette of black, with eyes staring forth through the flames. He turned back around as he could hear ravenous screams followed by cries of fear ring out in the dark skies. Sonia's garage came into view, light bleeding through the windows and the sound of heavy rock music leaking out from the door. Balor booted his way inside, the music near deafening. He made his way into the shop. Atreus followed unsteadily behind, collapsing into a nearby chair as the image of the man being burned alive replayed over and over in his head.
Miss Sonia! Sonia! Damn it, this music!
Balor found the stereo set and started fiddling with various knobs, only succeeding in making the music louder. Atreus snapped out of his daze and stepped up to turn the set off. Silence filled the space, broken quickly by the clatter of tools deeper into the shop. Sonia walked through a nearby door, wiping grimy hands against muck-splattered overalls.
Frickin' speaker system. I gotta get me a new... Oh, hey guys. Listen, I've done the heavy stuff on your bike already, but I still need to tune it a little before...
It will have to do. Atreus, mount up. Helmet on.
Balor marched past Sonia, grabbing Atreus' helmet from a nearby shelf and tossed it to him. Sonia followed behind and skirted around to block Balor's path.
Whoa! Hey, big guy, I get you Exorcist like to rush, but I just said I'm not done. Plus, you haven't even paid me yet.
The shrill cry of a siren cut the conversation short, the hauling squeal of it echoing all across the town and bouncing off of the walls.
Hey, isn't that siren for...
Atreus opened his mouth to reply, but was stopped by the sound of glass shattering at the front of the shop, followed by a blood-curdling roar. Balor tossed Sonia through the door and leveled his spear toward the noise, letting Atreus sprint past. The bloodless crashed just out of view, starting to tear around the shop as it searched for its prey. Balor stepped through the door and Atreus shut it behind them, twisting the lock shut and stepping back with wide eyes.
They followed us.
Sonia collapsed next to her truck and began to whimper, her whole body shaking.
Bloodless are here? But they've never been so close. We're only a few miles from Arcadia. Oh God, what do we do? God.
Atreus kneeled down to comfort her, reaching out a hand but hesitating, feeling unsure of what to do. The woman's eyes went wide before she whipped her phone out and began dialing a number. The phone rang as she continued to tremble. Atreus turned to Balor for help but saw him striding to his bike and checking it over.
Do we have a plan?
Leave town, lay low. Hopefully they'll be too busy to follow us.
What? We can't just leave. People are dying out there.
Which is precisely why we need to get out. I understand what you're thinking, Atreus, but this isn't a fight we can take.
Balor nodded his head in satisfaction and walked over to Atreus, gesturing toward the bike and grabbing Sonia's arm, who stood limply as he lifted her up. She was more concerned with redialing the number than she was with Balor.
This is your truck?
Sonia nodded.
Get in, get on the road. Forget Dallas. From the looks of it, this is a major infestation, and the Exorcists on call are axing anything on the street.
Balor released Sonia's arm and turned to leave, but was stopped by a tug on his jacket.
But where do I go? What if the Bloodless come after me and my friends? No one is answering.
Balor hovered for a moment, a brief look of compassion crossing his face, before it hardened into a stiff-browed glare.
You'll be fine. I'm sure your friends are doing what I am advising of you right now as well. Fleeing.
Balor shrugged away Sonia's grip and walked to the bike, starting the engine and mounting up. Atreus tugged on his helmet, turning back to Sonia as she stepped into her truck with tears streaking down her face.
Tyler? Hey! Where are you guys? Are you okay?
As Balor lifted a foot to mount the bike, the door caved in, splintering in the middle as a clawed fist smashed through the wood and wrenched it off of its hinges. Sonia screamed, slamming the door shut just in time for the Bloodless to stop reaching her in her truck, and it began slamming its body into the door with a snarl. Atreus saw the fear in her eyes, the look of someone who knew they were about to die. A voice was screaming over the phone she gripped tight in her hand.
Sonia! Hey! What's going on? Sonia!
Balor was busy with the bike, and Atreus couldn't see any of that mysterious fire anywhere, so he stepped toward the Bloodless and swung his sword as hard as he could.
Get off of her!
His blade was met with resistance akin to metal initially.
What?
It was surprising. The creatures looked like they were made of nothing but flesh and muscle with a few protruding bones. The close-up of the monster was surreal for Atreus. Its skin was dark as night. The creature appeared wet, as if it had just bathed in a pool before attacking. The stench emitting from its body was a putrid aura of iron and rot. The beast stood eye level to Atreus, with legs like that of a wolf's and the torso of a man. Its arms were too long for its body, with multiple joints in place before stretching into long, sharp talons. However, what made the creature most terrifying was its face. As its torso went up into the neck area, the skin became more human. Pale skin with pulsating black veins reached up to the face of a man. Tendrils of the black enclosed around the face like a mask, with his hair long like the mane of an animal. His jaw was dislocated and the maw inside held rows and rows of teeth and seething smoke from his breath. His tongue was long like a serpent and his eyes were red pupils, slit like a reptile, dropped in a pool of darkness rivaling the night sky. The surface being hard was uncanny, but Atreus dug deep in his strength and managed to cut through the scales. Ash erupted from the Bloodless's arm, and Atreus' sword sheared through the muscle, the dark powder splashing across the car and Sonia like wet sand. The creature roared in fury and swung with its other hand at blistering speed. The blow moved so fast that Atreus had no chance to avoid it, and as the razor-sharp claws sheared through the air toward Atreus' throat, he noticed a blur to his left and an impact as Balor rammed his full weight against the creature, slamming it against the far wall and leaving it in a mangled pile of its remaining limbs. Before Atreus could recover, a second Bloodless erupted from the battered doorway, its skeletal head snapping at Balor as he parried the attacks with his spear.
Right out now!
I'm trying! Animals, I'm fucking trying!
Sonia desperately tried to start the car, but it stalled out each time, the engine sputtering pathetically against the backdrop of combat.
She needs a push! Faulty battery.
Balor roared as he grabbed hold of the Bloodless's skull in one mighty fist and squeezed with all his strength, pulverizing the skull and leaving sticky ash all over his arm. The man turned and grabbed Atreus by the scruff, shoving him toward the bike.
Get the bike out of the way. I'll push.
Atreus leapt onto the bike and revved out of the garage, peering down both ends of the street but sighting no danger. He turned to give a thumbs up to Balor, who grunted as he pushed the truck forward onto the street. With a sputtering grumble, the engine burst to life, and Sonia cheered despite herself. Atreus smiled beneath his helmet, facing Balor, who let the beginnings of a smirk cross his face, before his eyes snapped wide open as claws ripped through his calves. With a grunt, the aged warrior fell to the side, and Atreus screamed as the Bloodless reared up to crush Balor. The evil creature never got the chance, as Sonya slammed the truck into reverse and smashed into the Bloodless, with Balor rolling out of the way by mere inches. Atreus dismounted and opened the bed of Sonya's ride, heaving Balor up with a strength he did not know he possessed, and pushing him onto the cold metal. Sonya needed no further instruction. She slammed on the gas, followed by Atreus on the bike. The convoy weaved in between the chaos of the city, maneuvering out of the way of people screaming for help, torn apart by horrendous monsters in the streets. Vehicles blaring horns as they attempted to flee. Atreus could feel his heart pounding. His mind began to wander among the carnage, witnessing children crying and parents being eaten alive. His head was turned for but a few moments before his father yelled his name.
Atreus!
Huh?
The young man whipped his head back around and saw a large semi-truck in front of his path. Atreus braced himself, maneuvering the bike to the ground and skirting it underneath the truck. The young man fell off the bike and it skidded away. As he lay there amidst the flames, the blood, and the deafening screams, came face to face with a corpse. Then that corpse spoke.
Please. It hurts. Save me.
Atreus felt weakness spread across his body as he began to rise from the ground. He wanted to help, reaching out for the man in naivety before the man began gurgling and contorting horrifically. Black veins began protruding under his skin, fangs growing in his eyes tinging with a glowing crimson. The man's voice distorted and he began violently grasping for Atreus.
Get away!
The horrified young man scrambled to his feet and mounted the bike again, revving the engine and speeding down the street to catch up to his father and Sonya. Atreus' vision focused only on the truck and his father. His eyes glazed over in terror as the convoy sped away from the carnage and the growing glow of the flames behind them.
Ivory Exorcist.
The sounds of the city sirens were still audible as Atreus sped away from Dallas, the fires dancing against the smoky air and illuminating the night sky behind him in an eerie glow. Sonya drove just ahead of him, the bodywork of her truck mangled and most of the windows smashed or cracked. They were all alive. For now. Adrenaline was still pumping through Atreus' body, his shaking uncontrollable and making it difficult to steer the bike. It was the first time he had seen a bloodless in the flesh. Grotesque collections of sinewy muscle and bone, in the vague shape of a person. After all his years of combat training with his father, he had hoped that if the day had come where he needed to fight for his life, then he would be more than ready to meet the challenge. Yet, the bloodless nearly ended him before he had the chance to fight back. And they had hurt Balor. Suddenly, Sonya swerved off the road into a patch of grass and juddered her truck to a halt. Atreus rolled in behind her, killing his engine and removing his helmet. He looked around, spotting only birch trees rustling in the night air, like ghosts in the wind. Sonya stepped out of the truck, standing on wobbly legs as she waved Atreus over.
Why did we stop?
Your dad told me to. I texted my friends to meet us here. Let me call them again.
Balor fiddled with the buckled truck bed door, trying to get it open, eventually electing to slam it open with the heavy boot. He staggered to his feet and limped toward Atreus.
Time to go. We need to get as far away from Dallas as possible. Sonya, I left some Verlis in the backseat. They're yours. I truly wish you the best of luck.
Wait, what? Hello? I'm on the north side of the city. I'm with some clients. We just had to get out. Come meet us here.
Sonia walked off to continue talking with her friends. Balor grunted as he swung a leg over his bike, kicking it back to life and looking expectantly at Atreus, who stepped away defiantly.
We already left everyone behind in Dallas, Dad. The least we can do is make sure that Sonia makes it somewhere safe.
Atreus, there isn't any time for that. Get on.
Atreus felt stunned at the callousness of his father. He had always had a ruthless streak, particularly when it came to training, but he had never been so cold.
What the hell is going on? You constantly teach me to care for those around me and train me to fight so I can protect people. Then, when people actually need our help, we run away and abandon them?
Balor fixed Atreus with an icy glare, stepping off his bike and towering over him.
I teach you to treat those around you with respect, and I train you to fight so that you can protect yourself. I have one job, Atreus. Protect my son. That's it. Nothing else gets in the way of that.
His eyes briefly flicked over to Sonia before returning his stare. Atreus felt anger boil inside of him, the frustration that had built up over time finally spilling over.
You were willing to let someone who helped us die. If I hadn't attacked that Bloodless...
That Bloodless is a creature you have neither the skill nor understanding to face. It is a creature that craves the blood of anything that lives. Born of men and women beaten down and controlled by a parasite that saps them of rational thought, leaving only bloodlust and rage. If I hadn't attacked that Bloodless, you would either be writhing on the ground in agony as you slowly lose your mind, or drowning in your own gore as it feasted on you.
The pair faced off, Balor's ivory eyes piercing through the night and meeting Atreus' own dark brown irises. They stood that way for what felt like several minutes, until Balor let out a long sigh and turned away.
I'm sorry, son, but we have to.
Sonia screamed from behind them, Balor retrieving his spear and Atreus spinning on the spot, only to be met by a collage of red eyes burning in the dark of the forest. Atreus grabbed Sonia and yanked her back to the truck while Balor stepped forward, the wounds on his legs steaming in the cool night air. Though as Atreus glanced down, it seemed that they had already begun to heal. Before he could react, the Bloodless roared out from the foliage and leapt into the air to attack. The hulking mass of his father took in a deep breath and rooted himself on the ground before he began hacking and slashing away at the approaching horde. Atreus gripped his blade and began hacking away at the monsters as best he could, until he realized he simply was unneeded. As he watched in awe as his father tore through the monsters with a ferocity he did not know he possessed. Each attempt the Bloodless made to attack Balor parried and countered with deadly precision. In mere moments, a pile of smoking corpses lay at his feet, their ash-like bodies disintegrating into puddles of oozing black. The forest fell silent once again, Balor gripping his spear ready for more. Atreus stepped out from behind the truck with Sonia close behind, gazing at the carnage all around. Balor breathed heavily, sweat trickling down his brow as he scanned the tree line.
Are they gone?
Balor spun to face Atreus, shock on his face as he reached a hand toward him.
Atreus!
Atreus felt the hairs on the back of his neck raise, and in a bout of instinct, he turned around, swinging his blade in defense. But to his surprise, the blade of the weapon was easily caught by a single finger.
Child of Ivory.
The voice that rang out filled the space like a tidal wave, the mere sound causing Atreus' heart to beat faster. Something about that voice was not only blood-chilling, but familiar, tinged with the feeling of knowing. The stranger was massive, taller than even Balor, with bulging muscles that seemed barely contained by his skin. His body appeared to be covered in shadows, pure darkness of black and emerald that clung to his body and distorted his shape. Yet nothing could disguise the long pointed ears that poked through his hair. Strangest of all, the man looked as if he had just run from a burning building. Smudges of soot ran across his face and embers burned against his skin. Atreus could not move. Even his breathing seemed to cease. He wanted to retaliate, but before the thought could cross his mind, his blade hummed with green energy and was shattered by the man's finger. The force was so violent that shrapnel tore across Atreus' arm and flung him back in a mere moment. But before the man could approach to finish him, his father stood in front of him, his spear poised to strike.
Another abomination running around all alone. An old one at that. In fact, I think I recognize you, Exorcist.
Funny. I don't recognize you at all.
Sonya dragged Atreus back as Balor flourished his spear and swung in a wide arc that should have decapitated his opponent. Yet, before the spearhead could find purchase, the stranger ducked the blow and moved with impossible speed past Balor to stand next to Atreus and Sonya.
My mistake. I believed you to be an exorcist of great strength. No greater shame can a warrior suffer than to grow old and withered.
Atreus held nothing but the golden hilt of his destroyed blade up for defense to the man.
I wonder what led you down such a path. And I wonder if it's not too late to bring you back.
The stranger brandished his hand, razor-like claws appearing from elongated nails. Atreus stood to protect Sonya, and was met with a swipe so fast his eyes failed to register it, the reality only dawning upon him as blood flowed from the new gash on his face. Crimson poured from the cut, and the pain floored Atreus. It was as if his face had 1,000 daggers ripping into it. The cut was deep, and Atreus opened his mouth to breathe as breathing from his nose was difficult. The stranger straightened and smirked, turning to face Balor once again.
I wonder now if...
The air between the stranger and Balor cracked as the spear impaled the stranger's chest, and he flew backward into the forest. Balor followed behind shortly after, stepping next to Atreus. He could catch a glimpse of his father unlike ever before. The man's eyes were glowing with furious tendrils of solar-colored light leaking from his form. Black veins began dancing along the skin of his body, as well as strange markings beginning to appear. Fangs protruded from his grit teeth, and he seemed in pain as his muscles bulged along with his form. But amidst the pain, Atreus briefly witnessed something much more terrifying. For a moment, Atreus felt like he saw his father smiling. Atreus heard a monstrous guttural growl emit from his father right before Balor launched himself into the forest. Atreus was unsure if it was his near blindness or the sheer speed of the combat, but he struggled to follow the fight as the titans slammed into each other and exchanged blows. Balor wrenched the spear from the stranger's chest, using his brutish strength to toss the man out of the tree line and back into the hilly clearing. The stranger scoffed, extending his arms out, black veins of his own protruding under the rippling biceps of his gray skin. Balor leapt into the air, flourishing his weapon behind his back before landing with a ground-shaking slam. The two men scoffed and prowled each other like lion and wolf.
What's wrong, friend? Scared to attack someone so old and withered?
Afraid your son might miss the chance to watch a piece of history be wiped from the face of Terra.
The stranger laughed before shaking his head and sighing. He took what in Atreus' mind should have been a single step forward, but in reality, the movement dashed him right in front of Balor. The man threw a kick straight into the chest of Balor, and the air rippled at the contact, but Balor simply caught the foot in his massive hand. There seemed to be a struggle for a few moments, Atreus seeing his father's skin become scaly, the light from his form ever intensifying until Atreus could feel his ears pop. The hairs on his skin raised as Balor slowly turned the foot of the man outward at an unnatural angle. Pops and tears could be heard before Balor let loose a roar and slammed the skull into the skull of the stranger, causing him to be sent ragdolling backward with his mangled leg. Horns of black burst from the skull of Balor, and his chest was glowing. Metallic tendrils of ethereal energy flared from his form as the almost unrecognizable beast went on the offensive. The stranger leapt to his feet, his leg untwisting and snapping back into place before he growled, crossing his arms over his torso as Balor's mighty fist contacted the guard, breaking the man's arms and sending him skidding backward in the dirt. However, this time, he was still standing. The man uncrossed his broken arms, snapping them back in place before his wrists burst forth two long, jagged blades attached to them. Balor was spinning his own weapon around in his approach before using the momentum to slash at the man horizontally. The blade of Brachus collided with the stranger's new weapon, and the stranger thrust his second blade into Balor, who grabbed the man's wrist and pulled him into a forceful knee to the face. Balor sidestepped the man as he doubled over, impaling his spear into the ground and bringing 2 fists into the air, before throwing the haymaker into the man's exposed back. The momentum was so forceful it somehow caused the man to bounce off the ground. Balor let loose a laugh as he grabbed his spear and sprinted forth, impaling the man's arm with one of his horns before throwing him into the ground again. He stomped where the stranger should have been, but the man rolled away, getting to his feet and growling a bestial growl. Balor turned around and threw his spear at the man again, but this time the man dodged it. Balor thrust his clawed hands into the ground and began to exclaim as he ripped through the surface of the Terra and upturned an entire chunk of rock and dirt, flipping it into the air and punching it toward the stranger. Green light began pouring from the enraged opponent, and Atreus' ears popped once again as the man screamed, "Enough!" The stranger in his newfound strength stepped forward and crushed the rock in front of him, sending dirt and debris all around the area. Balor did not stop there though, throwing chunk after chunk of rock toward the man high into the air like a rain of ballista. The opponent assumed a strange stance, before hacking and slashing the rocks away, eventually electing to jump into the air amidst one of them. Balor retrieved Brachus and leapt into the air as well, standing upon one of the rocks that he threw so high. He stabilized himself, and the stranger stood on the same rock. The man's muscles bulged, and Atreus braced himself as he shot forth at his father. Balor stamped the mighty boot into the ground and caused the fissure to split the rock in two and flip it overhead. The stranger was still somehow rooted on the rock above Balor, and their blades clashed, sparks of metallic light gleaming from each blow. The strikes gradually became more and more rapid as the two finally broke contact, and the rocks they stood upon slammed into the ground and caused the Terra to rumble and kick up dust. Sonya dragged Atreus more out of the way, but the young man kept his eyes on the dusty clearing. The 2 warriors stood tall, feet away from each other, in silence, before it was broken.
The dog of the blasphemous church. I understand now why you refuse to keel over and die. It would seem that you have embraced the idea of becoming a true monster, is it?
Balor remained silent for a few moments longer, before tearing off the rest of his upper garments.
I do what I must to assure the safety of my family. You are but a minor inconvenience in the path of my peace.
Safety of your family? But what of your wife? Galena, was it?
How do you?
The children of Eliza. You blasphemous lot, bearing crystal on thy chest, power inferior to that of the Kuvali. Let me show you what true power is.
The man barely got to finish the thought, as Balor, as massive as he was, moved with uncanny speed and wrapped his massive hand around the skull of the man, lifting him off the ground and beginning to squeeze.
I think not.
What should have been the end of the battle was met by the man taking Balor's hand and peeling it away from his face easily. He stepped into Balor's guard and turned to his side before side-kicking the man in the chest, causing Balor to stagger backward.
Kneel, monster.
Balor laughed, thrusting his spear forth, which was easily parried by the man's blade. The stranger spun around, hopping off the ground and kicking Balor in the back of the head. Balor rolled away after the strike, getting to his feet. The stranger was already in front of him, though, taking the man under the arm and lifting him up like a toy before exchanging furious blows with him. The tides of combat swayed so many times in the fight that Atreus was fully confused as to who may be winning. Watching Balor fight with such ferocity and precision gave him a ludicrous sense of pride that his father could hold his own against a monster. Unfortunately, the 2 warriors seemed evenly matched in skill. The only difference being that Balor was sweating profusely, and the wounds on his legs still steamed in the night air, while the stranger seemed as fresh as when they had started. Balor broke away, breathing deep lungfuls of air. The stranger sneered, gesturing toward Atreus and Sonya.
That is all you have. I threaten what gives you life, and you protect it so feebly. Truly a disappointment. I'm afraid I have to end this now.
The stranger leapt toward Balor with an invigorated attack. With each strike, Atreus' heart skipped a beat as Balor struggled against the onslaught, stepping back toward the forest edge until his back was to the trees. Finally, Balor had nowhere left to run, and the stranger smiled in satisfaction.
And you're just about finished, mutt.
The world fell silent as Atreus watched on. The stranger parried an attack from Balor, causing a flash of mixed green and yellow lights to ring out. The man then moved faster than Atreus could fathom, before impaling Balor with his claw. Balor jolted from the impact, his legs giving way as the stranger ripped his hand away from his chest and turned toward Atreus and Sonya with a grin.
I do believe your guardian was luring me away from you in the hope that you would escape.
The stranger padded lazily toward Atreus.
A shame. I wonder what it is he saw worth protecting. All I see is a weak, scared child.
Atreus could feel his strength sapping away, his blood dripping down his chin and staining his shirt. He tried to tell Sonya to run, to get away, but all he could manage was a quiet murmur.
Sonya, you have to run.
The stranger was only a few steps away now, soaking in the moment as he closed in on his prey. Balor had stopped moving altogether, his spear lying idly at his side. Atreus hoped beyond all reason that his father would get up, save him one more time, but nothing could stop this. The stranger froze mid-step, his shoulders tensing as if he had been shocked. From the trees to Atreus' left, a soft glow spread from the line. Embers began to tumble artfully from the sky. Atreus assumed he was hallucinating, his brain shorting out as his life left his body. Then, the forest exploded into light.
What?
The stranger leapt away from the light, green light of his own covering his body as flames burst into him and spread across his body like a tidal wave. He roared in pain. Retreating into the shadows, followed closely behind by a streak of red and blue that shot past Atreus, who blinked in disbelief as the forest grew still once more. The only ones left behind being a terrified Sonya and Balor, who lay slumped against a tree. Atreus collapsed forward, his shirt sticking to the grass beneath him as the blood smeared the ground.
Dad!
He stumbled to his feet, unsteady strides taking every ounce of strength left over until he finally reached Balor, whose chest rose and fell in an unsteady rhythm. Atreus grabbed Balor's hand, pulling it to his face and feeling tears streak down his cheeks. Sonya fell next to them, first aid kit in hand, as she started to tend to Balor's wounds. The night sky shone with brilliant purple light, the gems of the night dancing beautifully above the forest canopy. Despite it being the first of spring, a few sparse clouds rolled in. There, in that cold, grassy clearing, the last of the winter snow began to fall. And so too did the flesh of Atreus' father. Atreus' gut twisted, the burning smell of flesh wafting into the air, tinged with the scent of Balor's blood. The cold air tickled Atreus' exposed arms, and he could make out a very faint vapor from his breath in front of him. Atreus was crying silently, rocking Balor's head in his lap as the man's slow, labored breaths and coughing continued against the sound of fire and sparse screaming in the distance. Sonya was next to the two, crying at the sorry scene. Before Balor spoke, his voice still strong and unrestrained, despite his stature.
Did you see me kick that guy's ass? Pretty good for an old man, right?
The words hung in the air. A simple sentence that pulled the atmosphere taut. Atreus' eyes settled on the man. The sight was disheartening. A seasoned warrior, proud mentor, and greatest friend. But above all, the father Atreus knew was slowly devolving into a husk before his eyes. Atreus could see a thin, translucent layer of skin blanketing the muscle fibers of the man. Balor was a bloody, tired, decaying mess. His ivory eyes stared into Atreus's as he spoke to him again.
Fuck. This isn't exactly what I thought my death was going to be like.
Atreus clenched his jaw before forcing a reply.
Don't be so dramatic. You can heal from this with your power, right? You always heal when we finish fighting, so...
His father let loose a hearty laugh. The skin at the edges of his opened mouth tore apart like paper in the process. From those tears, where blood should have been, formed thin wisps of smoke. He began coughing soon after, and the weight in Atreus' heart grew heavier. Sonia rushed over to the car and retrieved a water bottle, unscrewing the cap and putting it to Balor's ashen lips. Atreus was in pain. So much pain. But kept smiling, as to not worry his father in these excruciating final moments.
These wounds aren't healing, Atreus.
Balor gave a much weaker laugh this time, yet the smoke seemed to grow thicker regardless. His heart started beating faster as the inevitable anxiety began to overtake him.
Shut up.
Listen to me.
No! You're not going anywhere. Not like this. We're gonna get you out of here, Dad. Just give me a second. I don't care about anything else, but you're not gonna fucking leave me like...
Balor lifted his hands and grabbed his face forcefully. There was a pause before Balor sat up, his body flaking off into ash even further from the movement. He placed a hand behind Atreus' head and pulled his forehead to touch his own before he spoke.
Atreus! Listen to me now. You need to be ready to face the weight of Terra's darkness. Alone. Find the Exorcist. Do as he says. He'll keep you safe.
The man lay back in Atreus' lap, grabbing hold of his hand and beginning to breathe more rapidly. Balor's body glowed with pale yellow light, and a gentle smile crossed his face.
I love you, Atreus.
Balor's body crumbled softly into ash and fell through Atreus' fingers. Atreus' gut twisted as he stared forth. Initial thought was overtaken by emptiness. The sunken feeling in his chest was replaced by a brief weightlessness that he could not truly fathom. The world fell silent. The only sound resounding in his ears was the thumping of his own heart. A heart that began to beat dangerously slow. Atreus' senses began to blur. He found it hard to breathe. It was as if his entire body was shutting down. Then, like a bullet, pain shot through his chest, radiating down into his stomach. Atreus doubled over, emotion and sensation finally returning as both the searing internal and blistering emotional pain pulsed through him. Tears ran down his wounded face, burning his now healing gash.
Why? Why? Dad? Dad, no! Come back, Dad. Please!
The taste of salt and iron danced on his lips and into his gums as he bared his grit teeth. A pained moan began pressing past his mouth before the sensations became overwhelming. Atreus began to scream. His senses dulling and resharpening intensely with each slow, resounding thump of his heart. He looked down to his trembling hands and could see his veins beginning to protrude with a black, inky color. Those veins carried that burning sensation to every corner of his body, beginning to spread to his face. Atreus shut his eyes and slammed his hands into his skull. The pounding would not stop, the burning ever intensified. And just as it seemed his body could not take any more, everything stopped. The physical pain was gone, with only the rage and sadness remaining. He looked to the cuts on his arm and froze as he saw the fibers of his muscles remending. Pale yellow light, along with smoke, rose from his wound. And in a few moments, he was healed. His focus sharpened, the smell of the forest suddenly becoming richer with the sense of turned earth and tree sap. He saw far into the tree line where before it had been blocked by an impenetrable wall of shadow. And he heard the heavy footfalls of something running toward them.
Sonia, get in the truck.
The woman wasted no time before rushing over into her vehicle and into the back seat. Atreus stood to his feet, looking out into the forest, being met with beady crimson eyes surrounding him. Rage trembled in his hands, and he bent down, grabbing his father's spear. The footsteps grew louder. Atreus could even hear the panicked breathing of Sonia in the truck. There was a group approaching. Atreus heard the footsteps louder near the car and turned to rush over to aid Sonia. Just then, he heard a change in the air and simply reacted. Atreus turned with the speed he thought impossible and wrapped his free hand around the throat of a lunging Bloodless, its flailing arm swiping at Atreus, who ducked each strike. With a grunt, he flung the Bloodless away from him, but another attacked. He parried off the snarling beast with a cumbersome spear, but noticed the new strength in his arms allowed him to manage the 7-foot-long weapon. Sonia's screech tore through the air, resounding with the sounds of the monsters. Atreus turned to see the creatures surrounding the vehicle, smashing against it and trying to force their way inside. Atreus turned around to guard against another striking beast before he felt pain shoot up from his ankles as another creature dug its claws into him. He lost balance, and the beast forced him to the cold ground. Atreus' newfound strength would have made it easy to best the monster initially, but just as quickly as the mysterious power came, it waned. His fatigue, his pain, and his grief, all returning. The monster stared at him, drool cascading from its maw as their eyes met. It snapped over and over and over again, trying to break Atreus' guard. The Bloodless attacking Sonia's truck let loose a bone-rattling howl. Atreus stared up into the maw of the attacking monster and realized that there was nothing he could do. That thought enraged Atreus. He grit his teeth, thinking to his father, whose ashes lay blowing in the night air. Atreus steeled his nerves and released an enormous battle cry as he forced the beast back. Then, in a flash of light and the sound of flame, a line of crimson ripped through the beast, top to bottom. It remained for a moment, seeming unsure as to what had just happened. Then its body slid away into two even parts that slapped against the ground and congealed into wet ash. Atreus blinked in confusion, looking back to Sonia and seeing that the rest of the attacking group had been incinerated in an instant. When Atreus looked back up, standing above him was a man with fiery red hair, a scarred face, and glowing eyes staring into Atreus's. Eyes of ivory.